March 1st, 1982. A Soviet spacecraft is falling through the atmosphere of Venus. It is not built like a spacecraft. It looks like a deep-sea submarine, a sealed titanium sphere, packed with instruments and a block of frozen coolant, built to survive the crushing dark at the bottom of an ocean. Because that is what the surface of Venus is like. Not an ocean of water, an ocean of heat and pressure that has destroyed almost everything humanity has ever sent into it. The probe is called Venera 13. The engineers who built it gave it 32 minutes to live. It touches down on a plain of dark, fractured bedrock. The sky above it is the color of rust and molten brass. Its cameras begin to turn, sweeping the horizon of a world no human eye will ever see in person. And somewhere in the 14 photographs it is about to take, according to one of the men who helped build it, something is going to move. Then it will vanish, and the scientific establishment will spend the next several decades pretending it was never there. This is the story of the only photographs of the surface of Venus that exist anywhere in human history. It is the story of the Russian scientist who stared into those images and said, "The one thing you are never supposed to say." And it is the story of a question an entire field quietly agreed to stop asking. To understand why these images matter, you first have to understand what Venus actually is. We call it Earth's twin, and we mean it literally. It is almost exactly the same size as our planet, almost exactly the same mass, made of the same rock, born from the same cloud of dust, around the same young sun. If you were building two identical worlds, you would build Earth and Venus. And then something went catastrophically wrong on one of them. The temperature at the surface of Venus is around 462 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt lead. It is hotter than Mercury, a planet twice as close to the Sun. The atmospheric pressure at the ground is about 90 times what you feel right now, the same crushing weight you would feel a kilometer beneath the sea. The clouds are not water, they are sulfuric acid, and the air is so thick it stops behaving like a gas at all. You would not breathe it. You would drown in it if the heat and pressure had not already killed you. And here is the part that should disturb you. Venus was not born this way. Billions of years ago, Venus may have looked almost exactly like the early Earth. The same size, the same materials, and quite possibly shallow oceans of liquid water under a mild sky for 1 billion years or more. A second living world right next door. Then the thermostat broke. The planet warmed slightly. The oceans began to evaporate. Water vapor is a greenhouse gas, so more heat was trapped, which boiled off more water, which trapped still more heat. A runaway with no floor and no break. The oceans cooked away into the sky. The water was stripped into space, and what remained was the furnace we see today. Venus is not just another dead rock, it is a warning, a twin that started exactly where we started and ended somewhere we do not like to imagine. That is the planet the Soviet Union decided, again and again, to land on. Nothing survives there for long, and the Americans understood this early. NASA gave up on landing on Venus decades ago. They send orbiters. They map it through the clouds from a safe distance. They do not touch the surface. The Soviets did the opposite. They went straight into the fire. Between 1961 and 1984, The Soviet program hurled a fleet of probes at Venus, an obsession with no equal in space exploration. And the early history of that program is a graveyard. Venera 3 became the first human object to reach another planet's surface in 1966 by crashing into it already dead. Venera 4 flew an instrument package into the atmosphere in 1967 and radioed data as it fell until the pressure crushed it long before it reached the ground. They had underestimated just how hellish the lower atmosphere was. They kept coming. In 1970, Venera 7 survived the descent, struck the surface, and transmitted from the ground of another planet for the first time in history. A faint signal, lasting about 23 minutes. Then, in 1975, Venera 9 sent home the prize that had cost 15 years of failure, a single black-and-white photograph of the Venusian surface, the first image ever taken from the surface of another world. Not Mars, not the Moon. Venus, a place actively trying to destroy the camera the entire time it worked. Everything that followed was built on that, and it brings us to the crown jewels of the program. Venera 13 and its twin, Venera 14. On October 30th, 1981, a Proton rocket lifts off from Baikonur carrying Venera 13. 4 months and 112 million kilometers later, its descent module separates from the cruise stage and drops into the acid clouds. The descent alone is a feat of desperate engineering. The lander is a pressure sphere wrapped in insulation and chilled down before arrival, so it begins its fall already cold, buying precious minutes against the heat to come. It falls under parachutes through the upper atmosphere, then deliberately sheds them, because in air this thick, a parachute is no longer necessary. A simple disc brake around the body is enough to slow it to a survivable speed. It sinks through a sky the color of a dirty sunset, the pressure climbing with every kilometer, toward a surface no working camera had ever left alive by much. Inside sits that block of lithium nitrate ice, a heat sink, a countdown clock made of frozen chemistry, melting as the heat of Venus pours in and begins to cook the electronics from the inside out. It lands at 7.5 degrees south, just east of a highland called Phoebe Regio. Dark soil, flat slabs of fractured bedrock, that rust-colored sky pressing down from every direction. 32 minutes. That is the design lifespan. Touchdown, take pictures, transmit, die. And then, Venera 13 refuses. 32 minutes pass, and it is still transmitting. 60, 90. By every expectation, it should be slag by now. Instead, it keeps working. It records the wind. It captures sound, the first audio ever recorded on another planet. A low, dense murmur of thick air pressing on the instruments. Its arm drives a drill into the rock and analyzes the sample. Volcanic basalt, the frozen memory of a planet that was once, and may still be, geologically alive. And it photographs its landing site in color, building the first color images of the surface of another world. And it photographs the world around it. The panoramas come back, showing a desolate plain of flat, layered rock slabs stretching to a startlingly close horizon, the soil dark between them. Part of the lander itself visible at the bottom of the frame. An orange-brown desert under an orange-brown sky. Utterly still, utterly lifeless by every reasonable expectation. exactly the kind of scene you would expect from the hottest surface in the solar system, which is precisely why nobody looked at it any harder for the next 30 years. 2 hours and 7 minutes after touchdown, 127 minutes, nearly 4 times its designed life, the heat finally wins. The signal stops, and those 14 photographs go into an archive in Moscow, where for 30 years they are treated as exactly what they appear to be: rocks, soil, pieces of a dead machine on a dead world. Until a man named Leonid Formality looks at them again. Understand who this man is, because it matters. Formality is not a conspiracy theorist or a blogger chasing clicks. He is a senior researcher at the Space Research Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences, one of the most respected planetary science institutions on Earth. He personally designed instruments that flew on the Venera missions. The sensors that detected lightning in the atmosphere of Venus were his work. He spent his entire life studying this one planet. He is not on the outside of the establishment looking in. He is one of the people who built it. In January 2012, in the journal Solar System Research, he publishes a paper. He has spent years re-examining the original Venera panoramas with modern image processing, tools that did not exist in 1982. And he says he has found something in the old frames that nobody noticed at the time. Several somethings, objects resting on the soil, between 1/10 of a meter and 1/2 a meter in size, with strange, structured shapes, and most importantly, objects that appear in some frames and are simply gone from others. He gives them names. The disk, a roughly circular object on the ground. The black flap, something dark and irregular that seems to shift position between panoramas. The stems, dark, knotted structures rising vertically from the soil, like nothing you would expect on a wind-swept plain of bare rock. A shape with a pale center ringed by what look like petals, which he calls a flower. Small objects here and there that he simply catalogued as anomalies, present in one exposure, missing from the next. None of them on their own would mean much. A rock is a rock, but it was the pattern that got to him. The way these structured shapes kept turning up in geologically plausible places, and the way some of them did not stay put. And one object, more than any other, made headlines around the world. The scorpion, a segmented, elongated shape that to his eye resembled a terrestrial arthropod, a body and limbs, perhaps 30 centimeters across. And this is the detail he built his case around. Venera 13's camera did not take one picture. It swept the same scene again and again over those 127 minutes, so he could line the panoramas up in order, like frames of a film, and watch the same square meter of Venus over time. In an early frame, the scorpion is there, sitting on the soil. In a later panorama, it is gone, and in its place, he argued, a shallow groove disturbed in the dirt, as if something had been resting there and hauled itself away. His explanation was pointed. When Venera 13 landed hard, it threw up a spray of grit. Perhaps the object had been buried or dormant, was disturbed by the impact, and then did what a living thing does when something lands on it. It moved, it left. His words in the paper were careful, but not vague. Translated from the Russian, let us boldly suggest that the morphological features of these objects would allow us to say that they are living. A senior Russian planetary scientist an architect of the Venera program, had just proposed in a peer-reviewed journal that a Soviet spacecraft photographed something alive on the surface of another planet. So how did nobody notice for 30 years? The answer is quieter than it should be. Almost nobody outside the Soviet program had ever seen the full data. The public and most of Western science worked from a handful of cleaned-up stills released years after the missions. But the originals were something else. Multiple exposures of the same ground, different timestamps, the kind of data set where you can lay one frame beside another, taken minutes later, and ask a simple question: is that thing still in the same place? Sanformality had all of it, and by his analysis, some of the things in those frames were not staying still. He found candidates in the panoramas of Venera 9 and Venera 14 too. Different landers, different sites, up to 7 years apart. Now watch what happens next, because what follows is not really a debate. It looks a great deal more like a burial. Within days, Western outlets converged on the same explanation. The disk was a lens cap. The scorpion was image noise. The objects hadn't moved. There were 2 different lens caps in 2 spots, mistaken for one thing that crawled. An old man finding monsters in static. And on the surface, that is reasonable. Venera 13 did eject camera lens covers after landing. Small, curved objects that fell into the field of view. This is undisputed fact. On the twin, Venera 14, one of those lens caps famously landed directly under the arm, meant to test the soil, ruining the experiment. Lens caps landing in the wrong place is not a fringe idea. But here is what the headlines skated past. Sanformality knew about the lens caps. He helped design these missions. He knew exactly what the covers looked like and where they fell. And when the criticism came, he did not retreat. He expanded, cataloging the stems, the flower, the disc, across multiple frames and multiple missions. The critics had real physics on their side, and it deserves a hearing. The resolution was genuinely poor, and there was a sharper objection. When you run a low-resolution image through aggressive modern sharpening, the software doesn't just clarify what's there, it can invent structure that was never in the original signal. Edges appear, shapes firm up, detail materializes out of mathematics rather than out of Venus. And the human brain is a pattern-matching machine that evolved to find a predator in a bush, so we see faces in clouds and creatures in static. That tendency has a name: pareidolia. The mainstream conclusion was that Sanformality, brilliant as he was, had processed a scorpion into existence and then recognized his own creation. It is a strong argument. It may be the right one, but it has one persistent weakness. It explains the shapes, and it explains why humans see them. But it strains to explain why some of those shapes appear to be in one place in an early frame and somewhere else in a later one. The journal took the unusual step of printing commentary distancing itself from his conclusions, while still printing his work. Western coverage skipped even that nuance. It simply said, debunked, and moved on. And that, officially, was the end of it. Except the universe refused to cooperate. In 2020, a completely separate team, with no interest in his scorpion, reported detecting phosphine gas in the clouds of Venus. Phosphine matters because on Earth it is produced almost exclusively by life, by microbes in oxygen-starved places, in swamps and sediment. There is no easy way to make it in bulk on a rocky planet without either biology or some exotic chemistry nobody has identified. And the location is the haunting part. The surface of Venus is hell. The clouds are not. Rise about 50 kilometers up into the middle of the acid cloud deck, and you reach a narrow temperate band where the temperature is around 30 degrees Celsius and the pressure is roughly what you feel at sea level on Earth. It is outside our own planet, arguably the most benign patch of real estate in the solar system. A human being floating in that band would still need oxygen and protection from the acid, but they would not be instantly crushed or cooked. They would simply be adrift in a warm, hazy sky. For decades, a few scientists have argued that if life exists on Venus at all, this is where it would be. Not on the dead ground, but in the living sky. Microbes riding the clouds, the way bacteria ride the clouds of Earth, sheltering in that one thin temperate band above a ruined world. Perhaps life arose down on the surface, back when Venus had oceans, and as the planet died, it retreated upward, following the last habitable air into the sky. And the phosphine, when they found it, was right there, in exactly that layer, exactly where anything still alive on Venus is supposed to be. The establishment reacted almost exactly as it had to Xan formality. The detection was fiercely contested. Too weak, an artifact, a different molecule. The original team refined their work and set the signal was still there. The argument continues to this day. Then the same broad group reported signs of ammonia in the clouds, another molecule with no comfortable, non-biological explanation. None of this proves Xan formality was right. Gas in the high clouds and objects on the surface are completely different claims, at completely different altitudes, on completely different evidence. You can believe the phosphine and still think the scorpion is a smudge. Most scientists do. But look at the shape of the whole thing. Every few years, from a different direction, using different instruments, someone knocks on the same door. Venus may not be entirely dead, and we have not gone back to look. Sit with that. The hardware is gone. The engineers are mostly dead. The country that launched it does not exist anymore. What survives is a set of digital scans of magnetic tapes of radio signals that crossed 100 million kilometers on a March afternoon in 1982. And a man spent the end of his life bent over those scans, insisting that for less than 2 hours, a Soviet camera watched something on Venus sit still, then get up and leave. Leonid Xan formality died in 2019. He never took it back. And here is the detail that should genuinely unsettle you. The reason this cannot be resolved is not that it is impossible. It is that nobody is willing to do it. Returning to the surface of Venus is one of the hardest things in spaceflight. Not getting there, but surviving. Ordinary electronics cannot function at 462 degrees under 90 atmospheres. They cook and die in minutes, exactly as Venera 13 did. And here is the frustrating part. The first pieces of the solution already exist. In a laboratory, engineers built simple circuits from silicon carbide, a material that keeps working at temperatures that turn ordinary electronics to slag. They put one inside a chamber, recreating the surface of Venus, full heat, full pressure, and it ran. Not for minutes, for weeks. But a test chip in a chamber is not a funded mission. That is the gap. The physics is no longer the wall. The will is. NASA's Da Vinci probe will photograph Venus on the way down, but is not built to survive on the surface for more than seconds. NASA's Veritas and Europe's Envision are orbiters. They will map Venus in stunning detail from above and never touch it. And Russia's Venera D, the direct heir to this whole story, has been delayed for over a decade with no firm launch date. The first time anyone seriously revisits Kazan formalities question, it will not be this decade, probably not the next. So the photographs just sit there. The disc, the black flap, the scorpion, frozen on tape from 1982, defended by a dead man, dismissed by a field that decided very quickly that it did not want to look any closer. And this, not the scorpion, is the part that actually matters. Forget whether Soviet cameras photographed alien life. The uncomfortable thing is the silence, the speed with which an entire branch of science agreed in 2012 to stop asking. Because here is the fact that never goes away. More than 40 years after Venera 13 melted on Venus, those 14 photographs are still the only ground-level images of that planet human technology has ever produced. Every textbook description of that plane near Phoebe Regio traces back to them and nothing else. Whatever is in those frames is the entire ground truth of an entire world. You can find the panoramas online right now. You can zoom in on the disc. You can find the exact shape Xan formality circled and labeled the scorpion. And you can decide for yourself whether you are looking at hardware and noise and the wishful thinking of a lonely old man at the end of his career, or whether something on the surface of Venus held very still for a camera in 1982 and then quietly moved out of frame. Maybe it really is just a lens cap. That is the simplest explanation, and simple explanations are usually right. But notice how badly the institutions needed it to be a lens cap. Notice how fast the question was closed. Notice that in over 40 years, on a planet where one of its own leading scientists swore to his death that he had photographed living things, no one has been willing to go back and settle it. Because the truly unsettling possibility is not that the scorpion is real. It is that we may never know either way, not because the answer is unreachable, but because we decided the question wasn't worth the trouble. An entire world, a few kilometers of it, photographed for a single afternoon in 1982, and then left in the dark for the rest of the century. Whatever moved or didn't move in front of that camera is still there right now on that same plane near Phoebe Regio, under that same rust-colored sky, waiting for someone curious enough and brave enough to send another machine into the furnace and look. The Soviets pointed a camera into hell, and the camera saw something. We still don't agree on what. Subscribe to The Cosmic Deep for more of the stories nobody tells you, from the surface of hell to the edge of the universe.